Okay, the first 100 with the new Taurus G3c is happening on a really noisy range day. So, probably going to be a lot of at the work table and voiceover for this first 100. But I'm going to take the very first shots right now so that I can tell you organically and in real time what I think while I'm shooting it for the first time. 10 yards downrange is an orange dot. So right off the bat, I like the sights. They are new to the G3s. They are Glock compatible, which opens up obviously a huge amount of aftermarket. The other thing that is new, redesigned, is the trigger. Not so much the mechanism, but the trigger shoe itself. It's still a heavy one, definitely a heavy trigger. But at self-defense distance and a bit, it does seem to like point of aim, point of impact. I was holding pretty much right on the bullseye, and I danced all around it. The G2c came with two 12-round magazines. The G3c comes with 3 of these very same 12-round magazines. All right, there's 20 rounds. I'm only loading them to 10. I have all 3 mags loaded to 10 rounds each, just because I got this weird even rows in the box thing. So I might as well put all 30 of them in that dot. Let's see if the slide stop works as a slide release. Yes, it does. That's extra credit for me, because I do like that control to work that way. Okay, I tried to pick up the pace a little bit, and I dropped a few low. Still, good windage. I'm okay with that. That's a good first 30 right there. The Taurus G3c is really considered a subcompact 9mm handgun. It is a staggered stack magazine design. Those magazines hold 12 rounds each, and the pistol comes with 3, which is pretty generous. The barrel is just over 3 inches long, and the gun stands 5 inches plus a little bit in height from the bottom to the top of the rear sight, so that's your concealable dimension more than any other. One of the characteristics about the G3c, just like the G2c, is the restrike capability. So it is a striker-fired handgun, but the trigger can restrike if you have a round that for some reason doesn't go off. The target market for the G3c is, of course, people who like Tauruses, Also, that target market is folks who need a self-defense handgun for home or person, but they don't have a huge budget to allocate to that. Not all of us are gun people, and we don't put a high priority to our budget on buying firearms. So those are their basic specs, but that's not what's different so much between the G2C and the G3C. Let's take a look at that. Okay, so what is new? Well, it starts up top, on the very top of the gun, with the sights. Probably the biggest note about these sights is that they are Glock sight compatible, meaning the dovetail for the rear will accept the appropriately sized sights that would go on your Glock pistol. The front sight is also fastened the same exact way and compatible with Glock sights for the front. Well, that opens up the possibilities to the entire aftermarket world of Glock compatible sights, which is virtually endless. That said, I will tell you, after one day at the range, the sights that come on this gun are very adequate, maybe even better than adequate. I like the blacked out rear with the serrations. That's pretty much my favorite type of rear sight. And the dot on the front sight is nice and crisp and easy to track and easy to pick up. The serrations on the front of the slide of the G3C were not present on the G2C, so that is new. That's an additional feature. That's a characteristic that's very popular with a lot of handgun buyers, so that was probably a pretty good move. There's also a scalloped magazine well and base plate, giving you just a little bit of room to get a pinch on that base plate of the magazine if you had trouble getting the magazine out. However, I will tell you that in all of my range work, I had absolutely no trouble having the magazines drop free each and every time. Probably the most noteworthy change and the most talked about change is the trigger. The safety blade on the trigger has been changed from being just a thin polymer blade that was a bit irritating to the finger to a much wider safety in the trigger. It performs the same function, but it's much more comfortable for the shooter. That is, of course, part of the new G3 trigger system from Taurus. It doesn't feel so much mechanically different to me when I run the gun. It just feels more ergonomically different, which is, of course, a good improvement. But the one thing I skipped over, and you might be wondering why I skipped over it, was the removal of the loaded chamber indicator. Well, that's because I wanted to show you that rather than just say it. For those who may not understand what that is, you can see here on the G2C on the left, the loaded chamber indicator, which was quite sizable. Well, when the chamber's loaded, that's going to stand up and you can feel it and see it. So they've removed that physical tactile loaded chamber indicator and left just the visual, little bitty peephole where you'd be able to see around in the chamber. That's a plus to me. I've never been a huge fan of the loaded chamber indicator. You can also see that there's a little bit of a design difference in the muzzle end of the gun up on the slide. That scallop cut is not really present, and instead, of course, we have the new serrations out front that we did not have on the G2C. And just for illustration purposes, you can see right here we've got that little scallop that you can get a hold of the magazine base plate a little better if you needed to. That was not present on the G2C. Of course, this G2C is wearing a Talon grip, as all my guns tend to do. This one probably will be soon. Underneath this Talon grip is a virtually identical texture, so they really didn't change anything there to my knowledge. The sights on the original G2C were not bad by any means, but again, that compatibility in the marketplace is probably much better. And of course, you can see a little bit the difference in the triggers. G2C had that single blade, and it really protruded a lot compared to most. And that I found to be a little bit irritating after a range day of shooting the gun, and the new one has a much wider and flatter trigger safety. It's more comfortable and it performs the same function. So there's a little bit of a side-by-side comparison between the G2C and the G3C. There's not a whole lot of differences. It's just a short list of bullet points, but they are good ones and important ones. And I think it represents a significant change in the design of the handgun. Okay, I had to put a hat on because the promise of a very cloudy day has turned out to be a big lie. If the weatherman was any bigger a liar, he'd be a politician. The Taurus G3c is intended to be a personal defense handgun. So let's try some personal defense ammunition. 6 Hour, Elite Performance, 124 grain V-Crown. Let's put 10 rounds of it in a fresh spot on the target. 10 rounds at 10 yards. All right, it looks like most of them found their orange dot. And that's not a bad group. If that was a real self-defense scenario and I had to put 10 rounds at a target, I'd be okay with that group. All right, I'm going to go back to the regular ball ammo. This is actually pointy ammo, Fiocchi. It is also 124 grain. I haven't talked about the trigger yet. If you're wondering why, it's because I'm really trying to get a feel for it. Like I said, it is heavy. It feels pretty crisp, but it has a nice reset. I'm trying to get a feel for the new trigger safety. Well, I think we can agree that shooter error aside, certainly an accurate little handgun. It'll put the rounds where you need them to go, that's for sure, if you can do your part. The big change to the trigger, and I'll talk about this more when it's quiet, the big change to the trigger is the safety blade in the middle. On the G2C, the trigger blade was very, just a thin polymer blade that was a little bit irritating to the finger, especially because the trigger pull is so heavy. So you're having to put a lot of tension on that blade, on that safety dongle, for lack of a better term, and it started to irritate the index finger. This one feels like it is certainly an improvement. Now, whether it's irritation free or not, I'm going to wait because it's a hot day, and so my hands are going to be a little bit sweaty. Sweaty skin becomes tender skin, and so it could be that, by the time I'm done putting 100 rounds through this thing, my finger might hurt, or it might not. So I'm going to kind of let that be the judge. But I will tell you, it does feel better. Initially, I can tell the difference, and it does feel like an improvement.
That opened the group up. Mags drop nice and free every single time.
Since there's really no point in ever probably doing a head-to-head between the G2c and the G3c, because frankly there's just not that much different about the two guns, I did think for the purposes of this video it would be good to compare the trigger pull, old versus new. So here's the G2c, and it's breaking at 4 pounds, 14 ounces and some change, and that is very good. That's extremely respectable. Alright, so now the G3c, £5 and 1 ounce and some change. So you can see that the gauge, and I could take a lot of different measurements and get a range of numbers, but you can see that they're so close that it's about the same. So the trigger is not any lighter or crisper necessarily on the G3. It's more comfortable because of this enhanced, wider safety.
So 120 rounds at the range today, and that's probably all I'm going to do because ammo is hard to come by, in case you hadn't noticed. But 120 rounds downrange today, and here's my thoughts so far on this trigger change. By the way, restrike capability on the G3c, just like on the G2c. The trigger is improved. 120 rounds, very little irritation to my finger, and that's with me using, you know, the tip end of the finger pad for my shooting. So if you were to bring that up into that first joint a little more, you would probably never have any annoyance whatsoever. So it is an improved feel on the trigger. I don't think it improves performance in any way at all as far as the actual trigger weight or trigger dynamics. You know, the length of pull, the number of pounds of pull, or the reset or any of that. I think all of that is the same. I'll take a look. I'll take a side-by-side look with the G2c to get a better idea for that. But I think it's mostly just shooter comfort, which is a good thing. It's always nice to see manufacturers address ergonomic issues and feedback from their customers. So we'll call that definitely a win. I also like the sights. The sights are, again, Glock compatible, and it is essentially like looking at a set of not Glock stock sights, but aftermarket replacements, because the rear sight is serrated for anti-glare, but it has no dots, so it's blacked out. That is a sight picture I personally like. If you don't like it, then obviously you won't like this as much. The front is just a simple white dot, but it all works together very nicely, and I didn't have any problems with them at all. Zero malfunctions today of any kind. Everything worked perfectly, and I shot a lot of different ammo through it. 120 rounds in, looks good.
I appreciate you watching. I would really appreciate it if you'd give the video a thumbs up if you liked it. In fact, if you'd like to see more like this, subscribe to the channel. I try and keep new content coming every week. Big thanks, as always, to my Patreon patron supporters. You guys really do help keep the content flowing here on the channel. And a big thank you to the folks in the industry that help the channel and support it in various ways.